We're on to our third and final session for the day. It's workforce adaptability, career development for adults at work. And we've got a different input this time. And may I invite our chair for this session, Lester Oakes, to come up onto that stage. Lester is the Chief Executive Officer of New Zealand Careers. It's a substantial role. He's recently just come back from South America, where he has another hat. Well, you know, given that all of you have lots of hats, his other hat, and the reason why he's here is because he's vice president of the International Association for Education and Vocational Guidance. It's really one of the major international association for our area, and Lester puts a substantial amount of his time and effort into that. Thanks very much, Lester, for chairing this session. Thank you.
Dramatic pause. Well, some people would say this is the only thing standing between them and a good night out. Well, one person would. I'd just like to reframe it actually and say that this is the session that will catapult you onto a fantastic night out. But seriously, this session, career development for adults at work, is a topic that really is at the sharp edge of what we're here to talk about, I think. It's probably the one part that's been most untapped in the work that we've done and considered as career practitioners and career policymakers. But before I get into it, proper, I realise that we have had a change of people at seats, and so I want to, just before we start the formal part of the session, take a moment for you to introduce yourself to those at the seats, the new people at the tables that you're at. You may have done that already, but if you haven't, I'd like you to do that now. And rather than, if you can go through the normal bit of who you are and where you're from, but I'd also just like you to tell the people at your table what you were doing this time, 4 o'clock last Saturday. A couple of minutes to do that now. Three-quarters of the way through your introduction, so you're just coming to an end in the next 1 or 2 minutes. Yes? If we can just round that off now, please, and bring it back to the front. This is like getting an upgrade to business class. Yeah, I thought it was useful to actually do your introductions then, because you have got into those new groups. I'm not going to go into the detail of what people were doing at 4 o'clock last Saturday, though. In terms of the session now, the process will be like this. I have a guest to share the session with. That guest is Wendy Hirsch, with whom we had this morning as part of the panel. And at the end of that sharing session with the guests, we will do some brief group work. I'm aware the day is coming to an end. I want to keep that tight as we can. We will finish on time. That's a promise. And then we'll have a chance to wrap up what's been a pretty full-on day. But what I'd like to do now is invite another colleague who's come from a bit further away from me. That's Wendy, to join me up here. I want to quote something that Wendy said this morning when she was up here before. She said, quote, "When you're English coming to Australia for the first time, you'll say yes to anything." And yeah, Wendy certainly has.
My safety blanket. My safety microphone.
Wendy, it's nice to have you here.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's a wonderful place, isn't it?
It's astonishing.
Yeah, it just takes my breath away. You know what? I looked out these curtains before, and blow me down, there's a beach and just the view to die for out there. And here we are, tucked up in here with our little boogie boards and bits and pieces, and yeah, that just lies just so breathtakingly close.
I opened my curtain this morning and there was a young man just surfing in on a wave, and I just wished I was about 90 years younger.
Right, yeah. And what were you doing at 4 o'clock last Saturday, Wendy? I'm sorry, I didn't quite pick that up.
I was potting up tomato seedlings in my greenhouse because, as I said to my group, I trust my husband with my real babies these days, but not with my plant babies, which are much more precious.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's kind of nice to have a conversation, you and me, as sort of kindred spirits. You know, we've come from across the sea from different directions. So it's kind of a pincer movement, really, isn't it, on Australia? Yeah, we're not locals. I know you're left-handed too, and I'm left-handed too.
Geniuses and criminals, they say.
Yeah. You know, put us together between us, you'd say we're average height. So, yeah, there's quite a bit going on there. But more importantly, I just like a chance to kind of shoot the breeze with you, I think they say here in Australia, about some of the stuff around career development for adults in work, because I think you know a bit about that. But you know what they do in Oz on a Saturday afternoon too? I mean, you know, it's you kick back, you relax, you've been to the beach, but I've got something even more special.
Rolf Harris?
Feel those. Feel those. So why don't we actually just rip the top off one of these and...
But you're better at I can't do this with one hand. Can Australians do this with one? Thank you so much. Ha! This is nearly worth having to sit here.
Oh, here's to...
Cheers.
Yeah.
That's so nice. Well, you can come and do this instead if you like, and I'll give you the beer. Yeah. Come on.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, Wendy, what I'm interested in tapping into in terms of you and your knowledge about career development and adults at work. So, I mean, I'm interested kind of... We talk about it like it's something that's sort of some six-headed monster out there, but what's the problem with it?
Well, I think one of the problems for you guys is that people don't call it that. The problem for employers is hardly ever expressed in terms of career development. The problem for them is how they grow their people, really. That's one problem, and they do recognise that. The other problem for them is it's something their employees moan about. Certainly in the UK, if you look at employee attitude surveys, which are conducted nearly everywhere, satisfaction with career comes really low. It comes way lower than pay.
Really?
And it's interesting to wonder what it is that people are saying there. And I don't know if they're really saying we feel stuck. I think that's what some people are saying. I don't know if they're saying we think you ought to have a career development process and you don't have one. Or they may just be saying, and some of my own research would make me feel this, no one's paying any attention to me. And in that sense, career might be just me. Certainly when people are satisfied with career at work, they feel that someone is interested in who they are. So employers are partly worried about it for business reasons, and they're partly a bit anxious that there's this thing their employees keep moaning about. And so they really come at it from at least those two angles, I think.
So would you say that it sounds like employees are more worried about it than their bosses, really?
Yes, and I think it's that bosses are worried about things that you would recognise as to do with career, but they would not express it that way. They would express it in terms of, how can we never find a supervisor? Now that's really because they don't have a process for actively spotting some of their best first-line operatives or call centre people and bringing them on just that little bit that they would be good supervisors. So they wait till they got a vacancy for a supervisor and then say, oh, we haven't got any supervisors. So I think it is there, but it would never be named, or very rarely named in this way.
Maybe recognised as a problem only once it's actually in their face too.
Yes, I think so. But I think more for us, people who would use the word career or career development, workforce development, you can never start by expecting an employer to say, I'm worried about career development, if you will, but they'll say, I'm worried about something else that you would recognise as having something to do with workforce development or career development, but they may not. And so I never start with that. I wouldn't dream of starting a discussion with an employer by saying, can I help you do something about career development?
So that kind of begs the question. I'll ask the question, then I'm going to actually just say something else.
You can tell I'm a researcher. I'm sitting here with a beer and microphone. Why have I got a pen in my hand? Do you think it's safe to put it down? It's hopeless, isn't it?
I'm just wondering too
That's
that
better.
there's some people down here and they kind of feel a little bit far away. I wonder if they should actually come and just sort of populate this area a bit more so they kind of...
You can have a beer if you come here.
Not mine. But seriously, if you people would like to kind of come and join in down here a bit, please feel free, because there's lots of space and it would just make it a bit nicer for us too. Oh well, there goes that one. So, I mean, is this new, Wendy, this thing we're talking about?
No, it's not new, but I think some big things have changed. One of the things... Some things have got much better and some things have got more complex. Some things have got better is, on the whole, in the UK, for all we still moan about it, many employers train better than they did before. There is far more available learning outside work than there's ever been before, although for some people it's hard to afford and various other problems, but there is more. And I think the battle on training, as we would still call it in the UK, the argument, at least, about whether employers need to train and so forth is largely won. That doesn't mean they're all doing it. So that's good news. But some other things have changed. One of the quite big things have changed that people never ever talk about is nearly all medium to large organisations have moved from a process where they used to place people in jobs. And therefore, even if they did it badly, they did give people career progression sometimes because they were in control of job filling. For a whole load of reasons, some good, some bad, actually, they have almost universally moved to what I would call an open internal job market, where when a job is vacant, they'll post it up, or electronically, and sometimes externally and internally at the same time. So it's down to you now. If you want this job, you go for it. How do you know whether it's the right job for you? How do you know whether you're ready? Will it be humiliating? If you don't go for it, will you have missed your chance? So people now actually face more decisions in the workplace, not about training and learning, which I think is the easy bit, actually, but about managing their own career within the organisation. And I don't think companies realise when they did that what a big change it was. It's an enormous change. So I heard about two guys the other day who work for Shell who are junior technicians who applied for a job in Brazil. They live in Newcastle in England, cold, wet place. They thought, we fancy a couple of years in Brazil. Now, Shell won't pay their travel because it wasn't advertised as the sort of job, but there's nothing to stop them going for that. Now, that's a huge career opportunity for those couple of guys, but they needed a lot of all the stuff we've been talking about today to think about, that's something I want to go for. And there was no one there overtly to advise them. Lots of people around to talk to, but no one to overtly help them work it out.
So if that's a gap that's been created, as you describe it there, then in an ideal world, what would someone as a career practitioner be doing within an employing organisation?
Well, that's really what I came here to find out. I think the way I'm trying to think about it at the moment, and I really don't know the answer to that question, is you have to think about what the kinds of things are that you might do, and which of those the person you might call a career practitioner would be well placed to do. Okay? So I'll just give you a quick counter through some thoughts. Are they the best placed people to help people know themselves better? That's one thing that people need. Those guys who went to Brazil needed to know themselves. Maybe yes is my answer there. And particularly if they're not lucky enough to have a good manager or a good personnel person or good friends at work or good people outside work, a skilled practitioner for some people can do that. Okay, second question. Do they know about the kind of jobs around? My answer is no. They may know about the general labour market jobs outside, but inside a firm, a career practitioner knows less about the real jobs than almost everybody else, particularly if they've come from outside. So they don't have much added value in terms of understanding work internally, because that's really what managers understand in a business and other people. Can they help people plan better? So they're only on 1 out of 2 at the moment. Possibly yes. But they could certainly train many people to this career management skills we've just been talking about. They might be able to do that. So that's good news. So we're up to 2 things they can do now. Can they help people access jobs better? Well, they might be able to help them apply and interview, all that stuff. But personnel people know about all that. Training people know about all that. Probably not. Can they give them access to learning? And again, my answer would be if someone needs learning outside the firm, they could be a very useful intermediary. But in terms of accessing training and learning within a firm that's big enough to have it internally, there's a learning function. So my thinking is there are spaces, and there's a big space around skilling managers and employees, as my table was discussing, being the person who trains the other people, bringing up the whole understanding. But that's very different from this assumption that we must get the practitioners in to give everyone a one-to-one. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. Also, I'm interested too, does that apply for you? Do you think that applies in the firms that you've seen with and worked with across the board in terms of size of firm, like big firms, small firms, or are there some differences there?
I think it varies a lot. In particular, I think big firms almost all will have a personnel or HR department, and many will have a learning function. And small firms, we know, don't. Many small firms wouldn't even have a single personnel officer. So that's a different landscape. But big firms are massively harder to navigate than small firms. So small firms have, you can see I'm a researcher, can't you? Small firms have a whole load of advantages here. So they don't have any of the infrastructure, but there's some stuff that's different. One thing is that everyone knows how well the business is doing. So HR strategists talk about the line of sight between business strategy and workforce strategy and workforce development and so forth. That's really hard in a big firm. In a little firm, everyone knows what needs to be done. I used to visit a little firm that made paper wrappers for things, and they had tea and biscuits. Everyone in England has biscuits. The brand of the biscuit reflected precisely the previous week's earnings. At first, that was an accident. 1 week, when the managing director was broke, he bought cheaper biscuits. And he found that everyone was asking him, are we doing okay? Is there a problem here? And sometime I visited him, and there were really thick chocolate-coated biscuits. And he said he now did it quite consciously. We have hundreds of different sorts of biscuits, not as good as the Tim Tam, but so that's what I mean. So that's easy. The second thing is everyone's visible. So if you've got a good person, you know they're good. Most big firms don't know who their good people are. Because if you're the leader, someone's 5 levels away from you and in another part of the country. And on the whole, it's less painful if you've got a good person to give them a shot at something than to go on having them be bored or underused or not getting the work done. So there's lots of opportunity for stretching work. So job design is very fluid. And finally, you can resource very cleverly. My favourite little firm sits across the car park from a department of IT that my husband works in. The leader of that firm did a PhD there. He only recruits master's students. And when he has a job vacancy, he walks across the car park. And he doesn't go to the students, he goes to the professors and says, "Who have you got who's good this year?" And he walks them back across the car park and interviews them on the same day, and by tea time, they know if they have a job. And he knows he won't keep them for more than 5 years. But in that 5 years, they get terrific career development with him, and he gets a terrific workforce. And his recruitment cost is the time he spends between lunch and tea time finding out that, now, I know no big firm that's that smart. They're just not. So what would career development be about there? I think that's mostly about helping that firm link with its outer world, linking it with education and training possibilities, helping them find recruits. I know some of the people in this room have experienced situations where careers folk help smaller organisations with recruitment, and firms less sophisticated than the one I've talked about need a lot of that help. But we tend to assume in the UK that small firms are dim firms, and that's a very dangerous assumption. And we tend to assume they're all in backward sectors, but actually we have a thriving IT sector, a thriving biotechnology sector. Our MBAs would rather work for a small firm than a big one. So we have to get out of this mindset that small firms are always weak, in trouble, and some small firms are a nightmare to work in, and some are wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, those are great stories. I think those stories to me just start to give some real flavour to the stuff. Well, what I thought we might do is this. I've got one more question I want to ask, and then I thought we could open this conversation out a bit more.
I think that would be a good idea. Then I could drink my...
And then you could have a little more of a swig there, and you get a little more comfortable, and just see if we can actually start to extend the conversation around the room. What I suspect they'll do is see that as a chance not to go back into groups for one last time, so we'll have questions flooding in here till 5 o'clock. But I could be wrong, but let's just see how that goes, and we'll just mix and match on that a little bit.
Okay. But
my last question was that how would you make the business case to employers about investing in career development for their staff?
Well, as I said before, I don't think I would ever start talking about career development. I think the secret here is you don't try and sell them something or get them to do something by leaping from you're a business, so you must need something called career development. So that's my first answer, is you have to make the case for developing people before you make the case for a service that supports them developing people. Does that make sense?
Just say that again.
You have to get them to make the link between the business they're in, the people issues they see, and their need to develop their people. It's then an easy step, but I've got one more thing to say about that later. It should be an easy step to then make them see the facilitators of that development. But you can't jump straight to saying, I'm a career development service, have me, because they don't know what why would they, how does that connect? They can't. You have to go back 2 or 3 steps, and all the evidence with things like small firms in the UK, where we've done a load of research, is whatever you're facilitating in a smaller business, you have to start first with their business. And I've spent a lifetime working with what I think of as difficult men. The first difficult man I encountered met me at the door of a paper mill in my very first job. He was the owner, manager of a very small paper mill in Scotland, of course, Viv. Where else? Where's Viv now? She's moved. And he came to the gate with his Alsatian. I was representing the government. And you need to know that I am seriously frightened of Alsatians, very. And he said, you know, I can't do the accent, I need a sub now, but, you know, what the hell are you doing here? And I was, you know, terrified. And I wasn't sure if I was more terrified of the man or the dog. And so, what do? You start asking him about his paper mill, don't you? What would you do? I mean, if you couldn't run. And that was my most important lifetime learning, you know, start with the paper mill. You know, by lunch, we were very good friends. But you have to start with the business. And therefore, we have to equip people in this field, if they're really going to work with employed adults and do that ever through employers, they have to feel completely comfortable starting with the paper mill. More seriously, perhaps, why should they do it? They need to develop people's skills. They need to think about the deployment of people's skills. Yes, you may have a great team, but could they be greater if they were doing different jobs? And you have to motivate people. And we know now that attending to people's personal career and development issues is a really key motivator. The bottom line for me is I want to shake the employers I work with and say, you're doing okay, but these people could do so much more. That's really the business case. And I meet bright people. I spend a lot of time interviewing all sorts of people in my research, and they could all do more. People are not as dim as employers think they are. Employers see the qualification, they see the age. You know much more about this than I do. And they don't see what someone could do. And that's really the business case, but you can't quite say it to them like that. So I think the business case is about starting with the paper mill, start with the business. Don't even think about careers. Think about how could we have better skilled people in the right jobs, happy in those jobs. And then just try and crank them to thinking, even if you think you're a good business, maybe your people could even be doing more each day. And that's what business people want, but they often can't see that connection. Does that go anywhere near?
It does, yeah, it does. I find that really, really helpful about almost putting the stones in the pond in place so the leap's not too big.
Yes, you can't expect people to make a huge leap of imagination from a business they're trying to run to something called career development.
Well, let's say we kind of pause it there for a minute and just imagine for a minute, just us sit here and think that people might ask some questions from out there to here.
It's an astonishing thought.
It is an astonishing thought. But let's just try it real hard and maybe it will happen.
Right, anyone for a beer and a question?
Oh, perfect.
As I'm listening to you, Brian Mooney from Ireland, as I'm listening to you, a thought occurs to me. If you were to ask an employer, you know, what gets them out of bed in the morning, they would probably say, you know, it's my business, it's blah, blah, blah.
Brian, closer, please.
Sure. It's my business, it's, you know, I'm motivated by it. And the follow-up question might be, well, what do you think gets your employees out of bed in the morning? And some mornings they don't get out of bed. And why do you think that might be happening? And that conversation would probably lead you to, well, you know, their level of motivation. And that could lead you to, well, how might they be more motivated? And how, if they see themselves in terms of the job and where it may be going or not going, etc. And if they were more motivated, do you think you might make more money? And, you know, I think at that point in the conversation, they might say, well, tell me how to do this. And I think there is the possibility of introducing the whole idea about the professional, career guidance professional who might help the employee to, one, see where they are now, two, where they potentially might be going to, and three, what they might need to do. And in the process of doing that, the employer is going to earn an awful lot more money from that person, and they're going to be at work a lot more often, and they're going to work harder.
Yeah, I think that's quite right. I think the other bit of this jigsaw, and I spend a lot of my time doing this, is trying to help employers understand what their employees are trying to tell them. So when someone fills in an attitude survey form saying, I'm not very happy about careers or development or my job, or whether they don't get out of bed in the morning and they don't come to work, which is another signal, it is actually hard for an employer to guess, and I don't think it's necessary to jump straight to one-to-one or group work, but I think there is a role, and I've been wondering about this the last couple of days, whether there's a role for some people here who don't see themselves as researchers, but helping employers investigate, not necessarily in a heavy-handed way, what the issues are. I spend my most enlightening times are listening to smallish groups of employees talking about whether development's working for them or not. And employers are very interested in that, and often they're very surprised at what people say. They're very surprised that often people love their work much more than the employer thought. And sometimes it's a frustrating little thing that's putting them off. Like, my manager keeps telling me to go on training courses, but then he always cancels them just before I'm about to go because he says I'm too busy to go. You know, that's a classic. So I do agree with you. I think starting to think motivationally, but again, we have to be very careful with the words. not to sort of give them our words, if you see what I mean.
Thanks, Wendy.
Yeah, Wendy, I have a question about, because in some ways what you're saying sounds a little bit like a one-sided, sorry? Sounds a little bit like it's quite one-sided. Like all the responsibility is on us to make the case, and none of the responsibility is on the employer. And an issue that I just want to address with you is one that I think we've really faced in Canada for a long time, and that is a huge, huge amount of money that is being invested in employers developing recruitment information that gets poured into the schools by the truckload, by the absolute truckload. And it's all about them trying to push kids into my sector instead of pushing them into somebody else's sector. And we have tried so hard to try and, in fact, educate the employers that it is more complex than that. It is about trying to look at building relationships with young people that help them see that there's a future there, and it is not just about information. And frankly, they are very, very tough. I have found it very difficult to educate them to see the world a little bigger than, here's my package of information, now schools go out and make this happen for me, recruit for me. It's like they want marketers. And so I guess the point I'm raising is, I think there is a bigger issue here, that the employer has a responsibility to grow up a little bit too and see that the world is not so black and white. And I find they're quite resistant to listening, to taking a more holistic approach, even if you're dealing with, you know, recruiting young people into their firms. It's quite difficult first to get them to work together, you know, in a collaborative way across sectors that might make sense to a school system. So I just wondered if you had some comments on, because I think our field has a lot to do that could be very helpful there, with helping them understand that there are ways to pull the right people, you know, and not push them all the time, you know, and they're tough. And so I wonder what you would say about how do we educate them to become a little more tuned in to human development on a bigger scale? That's my question.
It's a great question, it really is. Just a few random thoughts. The beer is now working its way through and my alcohol tolerance is very low. So I will become completely incoherent in a minute. One is you don't talk to recruiters, actually. They're measured. You are all talking about measurement. What's a recruiter measured by, Lynn?
These aren't recruiters. These are not recruiters.
Who are they then? Oh, well, they're the work. Oh, no, I can't say that. I can't say that. They are... Talking to a sector council is not talking to employers. So, yes, work with sector councils, but actually reach out to individual employers and spend time with them. And they will then influence their sector council for you. So, and even within a firm, I would never talk to the recruitment department about career issues. I would try and talk to the line. My own personal policy is to try and find a bit of the organisation in a large organisation, or different in a small one, a bit that A, has a bit of a problem with people, and B, where the manager is interested. And just spend time with them. The second thing, coming back to your question about responsibility, I'm not interested in making a business case for you guys to go and work with business. They've got people crawling all over them. So if you think you're the people who've got something to offer, yes, they have to grow up. I agree with you completely. But you have to grow up too and realise you're not the only people on the block who know about people. And you've been slower to move. In the UK, the careers profession has been the slowest to move, to realise there are other people around who know about people, not least managers. So the other aspect for me of making the business case, and I know it's something my colleagues from Scotland are thinking about all the time, is you don't just have to make the business case. You have to make a form of delivery that some sensible person would want, if not to buy, then at least to consume. And I think we're a long way off that. And I personally am a long way off knowing what that would look like. So even if you got employers in the UK to the point of thinking there is conceivably something that career development practitioners could do for them that their existing staff couldn't do, that I hear no message about a business model or any shape of delivery for how that would be irresistible for them to say yes to. So you have to do two things. And actually for me, if you got the second right, the first would almost be leapfrogged, because people are not slow to see when there's something, and they'd think, A, I find this person credible, B, this person can talk the paper mill, and C, they're telling me there's a way they could work with me that I would feel comfortable with and I know would work. And that last one, for me, is the one that's, at the moment, kept me up all last night, really, thinking, well, okay, I can see these people know about stuff and I think employers could benefit, but I'm still way away from thinking, how would that look like in delivery? Because it is not going to look like a load of professionals coming in and doing massive amounts of one-to-one work with employees. So people I've heard today and yesterday have good ideas. Yes, it might be about coming in and running things with managers. It might be about seeing the few people who are really hard to help, who are at a loss themselves to know what to do. I think there are gems in the room of beginnings to see, but it is not like coming and delivering one-to-one interviews with a load of employees inside firms. I don't think.
Well, Wendy, I said if we just thought and believed hard enough for it to happen, it would happen, and it's happening in spades. I've got 3 more questions lined up, and I'm going to have to close it off there. I've got one here with Colin, one here with Tony, and one at the back with someone I can't see. So we'll go here, here, and then we'll finish over here.
Colin Johnson. I am a manufacturer, and it's got nothing to do with paper mills, so I'll make that up the front. What I would like to share is a life experience of my own, and that's that I'm from private industry. I own a group of companies, and traditional for a managing director or CEO of these sort of companies is you walk the talk and you work 12, 14-hour days, 7 days a week, etc., etc. And the one thing I've prided myself in for a long, long time, and I know you're drinking alcohol there, is the DTs. Now, the DTs to me is delegate and train. So the only way that I can move forward in my job is to delegate responsibility and train whoever I can to take over those roles. Now, we're crying out for skills in metals and engineering, and I guess there is a need from employers to say that career advisors and schools and students, parents, and many of the other stakeholders have to understand that industry has changed, and it's changing at an alarming rate. We have skill shortages now. Skill shortages come in technology. Years ago, an operator would walk up to a brake press or a guillotine and he'd put a piece of metal in it and he'd bend it. Now, the younger generation seem to be able to use the machinery because all of those machines have computers and they're very highly integrated into the computer system. So for that reason, there are new careers and new career pathways that we cannot fulfill. And it's no good just getting a fitter anymore, because a fitter needs an electronics background. Does that make sense? So what we've tried to do here, I also sit as president of the Sheet Metal Industry Association, and our main charter is New South Wales. And to try and get our message across to younger students, and we're targeting the younger generation. We've even put a sculpture competition together, and we invite school students to enter a sculpture. Its base material is out of metal, because we want to push the metal sector. And the idea is nothing other than to make them aware of our industry. So I hope that sort of gives you an insight into what we're trying to do to promote our industry.
Only one very quick thought, which is it's partly in response to Lynn's question. That word awareness is a nice one, isn't it? You know, there's a difference between pushing an industry and helping people of any age know what is happening in an industry. And therefore that's an interesting balance in response to your earlier fear of, it is a genuine concern, that one, about pushing kids. But I think that there are things going on in industry that people of any age don't know about. So getting that right is really key.
Right. What I would like to say, if you want to target employers, I'd say target private industry first, because they are the most flexible and the most willing to free up some of their time. And I'll leave you with my final thought that I give everybody, that if you're going to make it in metal.
Can I have a job? That's why we're drinking out of tins. Tony.
So far we've been talking as though this is something for employers and the career development industry to sort out, basically. But this is a symposium on career development and public policy. And the question I'd like to ask is there a role for public policy within a human capital, that kind of human capital framework we heard about this morning, for example, to facilitate, support, encourage this in ways which might be actually acceptable and even useful to employers, rather than regarded by them as being something which they're going to reject and not work with?
As you know, Tony, I become a gibbering wreck when people ask me questions about public policy. But I think there are probably lots of roles for public policy, and I think we need to perhaps think just more widely about what they might be. I think there is a huge role for public provision for adults outside firms that reaches better in and out of firms. If I was going to place that genuinely impartial one-to-one work, personally I think it's more honest to place it outside the firm than inside the firm. And that would help many firms, actually, if people had access. I'm greatly enamoured, as Gareth knows, of Learn Direct's work in England and the UK. And, I think anything that is public, that's practical, that's outside the workplace, will have an effect. There would be kids then who would know more about metal. That's one thing. I think we have to continue to be imaginative about what the real incentive is, and I'm not talking about money incentives here necessarily at all, to provide a political environment, a policy environment, in which it really is in the interests of employers to train. And I think very often employers don't feel that. They feel our state, you and I in the UK, has shifted almost all the burden to employers, and I think they're happy to accept responsibility, but whether it's solely their responsibility, I think, is an issue. And finally, I think we have a huge issue about how we prepare the various different professions that work with people, of which career professionals or career practitioners is only one. And I think our state could be much tougher about banging all their heads together, actually, and say, look, why the hell have we got all these separate groups even within one profession, and just refuse to talk to them until they get their heads together, I think. But also how the professional bodies work with government and so forth to try and make a real leap in the alignment of the work you're all talking about, the skills you're all talking about, with the way we train people. And I think our profession's ready for that, really. But the rest of the furniture doesn't seem to be making it happen fast enough for my taste. Does that make any sense, Tony?
Well, Tony, I'm really conscious of really conscious of time, and I said there'd be one last quick comment here, and then I just need to bring this together. Okay, so it'll be a quick response to.
My comments were originally precipitated on Lynn's comments, but we've had a whole bunch of conversation in between, so I'll just make a few comments here. One, Lynn talked about the national sector councils that we have in Canada and some of the information that they're been developing. And I guess to just sort of reiterate what the gentleman said, a lot of the perceptions, at least around youth, and I don't think Canada is particularly a unique example, is not all that accurate, and as to what jobs there are that are available, what the type of specifications of the jobs are, what actually life is like in a particular occupation. And so a lot of what employers and what industry are trying to do is develop relevant information to talk about what the jobs are like and talk about what careers are like, so that individuals and students have better ability to make informed choice. Of course, it's difficult to get all that stuff in front of kids and help them do that, but that's part of what they're trying to do, is to create awareness. It's based on that labor market information that we talked about. Lynn's other comment was about competitiveness and how can we talk to employers or industry because they are so very competitive. And I just want to give you an example from a Canadian perspective, particularly Alberta, where I'm from, where we have a very, very overheated economy right now, and there are way more jobs than what there are individuals for. And it's created a very, very interesting situation where we are seeing now a huge amount of collaboration across industries, from employers, from unions, from everybody, about how to address the issue, because they realize this is the most key, important economic issue that they have facing them. That people capacity and the skill sets and finding people is the key criteria for them to be able to grow. And we're already seeing the impacts of slowing growth in Alberta because they can't find the people to do it. That's been very interesting for me as a public policy person in doing a lot of consultation over the springtime about, similar to what Helen talked about this morning, about a workforce development strategy, about a labor force development strategy, and seeing some true collaboration from industry and sitting down at the table to talk about stuff. They're not, yes, they are in competitive situations in that and with union on it. So it does happen, but often they have to sort of see their, competitive survival in their face to sort of drop some of the cards and be willing to collaborate and do that. Back to Tony's point about what's the role of policy can bring to it. Policy can have a critical role in facilitation and helping bring various groups around the table to have some of these broad discussions and have some of the discussions about what are the outcomes and what are we all trying to achieve, and how can we move forward in developing some action plans to be able to do that. And I think we've got lots of good examples from our countries on how to do that.
Okay, thanks. On that note, I'm going to call this part of the session to a close. And in doing so, Wendy, I'm going to thank you very, very much. You're a good sport, and not only a good sport, but I think you've told it as it is from your point of view here, and I think I've actually put a lot of gems out there, and I love the examples you've wrapped around the stuff that you've put there as well. Your honesty, your frankness, your spirit. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask for 10 minutes more effort from you, because it's now 20 to 5, and I want to take the two questions. You know the drill now, blue thing, blah, 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 groups, yada, yada, yada. But what's different this time is that the groups are new groups, and I do want to have a chance for you to actually just bounce what you've heard in your, with your new group members before we go tonight. I'm going to ask you to take 10 minutes to do that only. And so these tables here will ask to take the 10 minutes on question 1, and these tables here, the 10 minutes on question 2. If there's just absolutely one request I make, because we are starting to come towards the end of a long day and time is tight, is that if there can be 2 legible statements made on the blue sheets in relation to your question at 10 to 5, then we can go into a very quick wrap-up for the end of the day. Thank you.